Hello, hello, you're listening to Andy's Book Club. If you're new here, welcome. This is a show where we go over an exciting book chapter by chapter on a weekly schedule. Every week, I provide a recap of the chapter we're covering, and I add my commentary as we go along. If something requires more explanation, I might reserve some time at the end of the show and discuss it in more detail. So whether you're studying for a test, writing an essay, or if you're just like me, you're super passionate about reading, this show is perfect for you. As a reminder, this show is available on YouTube, Spotify, and a whole bunch of other platforms. And if you're watching this on YouTube, the links for all those other platforms are down below in the description. Or if you prefer, you can simply just search Andy's Book Club directly on your favorite platform. Wherever you might be listening from though, if you like the show, be sure to follow and subscribe. This show also has a Twitter page, so if I need to post visuals, I will do so on twitter.com/andysbookclub. So be sure to follow me there. This week, we will cover the great peace that came after the First Dornish War. Recall from last week, Aegon had agreed to the peace treaty proposed by Princess Daria of Dorne, who came to King's Landing on behalf of her father, Prince Nymor. Aegon was by now tired of war, having paid a price that was for him way too high, in the form of the death of his beloved wife, Rhaenys, as a result of the war in Dorne. Now was the time for reconciliation and rebuilding the kingdom. To this end, Aegon will be known in history just as much for his reforms to the entire society of Westeros as he was for his wars. He made an effort to include men and even some women from every part of the kingdom to make up his court. Lords were also encouraged to send their children as squires and cupbearers to court so that they can witness firsthand the customs of how things worked in King's Landing. The Targaryens also made an effort to broker marriages between different houses across Westeros. All of these actions, you see, were done with the explicit purpose of bringing together the powerful families of Westeros. Aegon wanted people to get used to the idea that everyone belonged to the same kingdom now. Although people still refer to Westeros as the Seven Kingdoms, Aegon really wanted to make an effort to limit disputes and foster a sense of togetherness and nationhood between the formerly independent kingdoms. It was important to Aegon to get people to stop thinking of themselves as Stormlanders or Northernmen or Westermen, but simply as loyal subjects of the crown. Aegon also made an effort to travel around his kingdom to meet various lords and ladies in person. The purpose of this is to get to know his subjects and their various grievances and personalities. It is better to forestall rebellions than it is to put them down, Aegon was quoted to have once said. Although, yes, no doubt the main purpose was to prevent rebellions, I do think that Aegon really loved to travel and to a degree socialize with people that are serving under him. So it's kind of like when a company gets a new CEO and the CEO just wants to meet everybody, So I do think that Aegon really enjoyed touring the country, and it wasn't just for the sake of sniffing out who might be disloyal. But anyways, Aegon was also careful to respect the local customs whenever he could. Even though he's the king, it was very smart of him to not rock the boat unnecessarily. The last thing he wanted was to accidentally disrespect someone and trigger a revolt unnecessarily. To this end, he traveled with 6 maesters. Recall, maesters are the scholars and intellectuals of Westeros, and they had this chain where they wore around their neck, where each chain or each link of the chain is made from a different metal that represents something that they're proficient in. So Aegon would consult his maesters about local customs wherever he went, and it was said that he learned a lot about Westeros from his travels and experiencing things firsthand. Now, this is the time to bring up one area of criticism where many people have raised against Aegon looking back at his time as king. By leaving traditions intact, he allowed many horrible traditions to continue, such as the right of the first night, which was practiced in some parts of Westeros. The right of the first night is a right given to the lord of a given region where a young woman in that lord's jurisdiction, whenever she was to be married, the lord of that jurisdiction would have the right to take her virginity on the first night of her marriage, instead of the husband. So this was considered a barbaric practice by some, even by Westerosi standards. And this was still practiced in some parts of Westeros, and Aegon allowed it to continue. But again, Aegon's priority was to maintain the peace, and he allowed as many existing traditions to continue as they are as possible. Aegon also took an effort to standardize things such as taxation as much as possible. He exempted the holy men and women of the Faith of the Seven from taxation to maintain good relations with the faith. Aegon was never an extremely pious man, but he saw the importance of maintaining good relations with the faith. As the story progresses to future Targaryen kings, you'll find that Aegon was wise for being on good terms with the Faith of the Seven, and some future kings, his descendants, would not perform as well as Aegon did in this regard, with disastrous consequences. This is foreshadowing, by the way, but we'll talk about that in future episodes. Anyways, Aegon also created posts such as the Hand of the King, which is basically a second in command, kind of like a vice president. It is also told that the idea of the Kingsguard was thought up by Queen Visenya. Over the years, Visenya would accumulate somewhat of a dark reputation. She was always serious and stern, and it was said that even her beauty had an edge to it. She never shared a love of the arts and music like her sister Rhaenys, and she was not a very sociable person, let's just say that. But undoubtedly, she did love her brother-husband Aegon and wanted to protect him from people who inevitably will want to assassinate him because he's the king. It was said that one day she lamented to Aegon how there was no way she could be there to protect him 24/7, and when Aegon countered that he had guards, she pulled out her sword and sliced Aegon's cheek so fast that the guards did not have time to react. She told him that his guards were lazy and slow, and if she was a real assassin who would have gone for Aegon's throat instead, he would be a dead man already. Thus, the Kingsguard was born. The Kingsguard would be a dedicated order of knights whose primary duty is to protect the king, and there would be 7 Kingsguard in honor of the Faith of the Seven. Aegon created the post of Grand Maester, who's a representative of the Maesters Guild based out of Old Town. Aegon saw the benefit of having an extremely knowledgeable person in his court and asked the Maesters of Old Town to send their best to serve in King's Landing. All of these positions were created over the years by Aegon and would eventually make up what's called the Small Council. And if you've ever seen shows like Game of Thrones or House of the Dragon or any series related to A Song of Ice and Fire, you'll recognize a lot of these posts. And maybe even name a few characters in these positions that I just mentioned in the time that the show takes place. But anyways, after all these reforms, even Aegon knew he could not live forever. Now came the question of succession. Aegon had one child with Rhaenys, a son named Rhaenys Targaryen. Rhaenys was always small and frail, and he was only 3 years old at the time his mother, Queen Rhaenys, was killed in that fateful battle in Dorne. This messed up Rhaenys in ways more than one. He regressed back to crawling like he did when he was 1 year old, and he stopped eating. There was a lot of speculation if Rhaenys would ever be able to inherit the Iron Throne given how small, frail, and sick he was. There were even rumors that Rhaenys was not even the true-born son of Aegon since they seemed so different. It was said that Rhaenys always hung around handsome young men who she would sing and dance with, although the rumors around Rhaenys' parentage are just speculation, and there's no real evidence to substantiate that Rhaenys wasn't Aegon's son. However, Aegon's court did worry about the question of succession. This worry was finally put to rest in 12 AC when Queen Visenya gave birth to a son named Maegor Targaryen. Maegor was the exact opposite of his brother Rhaenys. Maegor, at his birth, was said to have weighed twice as much as his brother Rhaenys, and was strong and healthy, as opposed to Rhaenys, who was, again, small and frail. According to the rules of Westeros, the firstborn son of the king was heir to the throne. This system of inheritance is called male primogeniture. So despite Maegor seemingly being the stronger ruler, it was neither within the rules nor did Aegon show any interest in making Maegor the heir instead of Rhaenys. It was clear that Rhaenys was still the heir. since Aegon took him along with his royal processions to visit different parts of the realm in order to show him how to be a king and prepare him for the throne. Maegor, on the other hand, stayed with Queen Visenya on Dragonstone. By this point, Aegon and Visenya were often apart, since Aegon was traveling all the time with Rhaenys. Recall from previous episodes where we talked about the dynamic between the Targaryen siblings. I think it goes to show that although Aegon and Visenya loved and respected each other, theirs was never a passionate love. Aegon and Visenya loved each other, but not in the same way that Aegon and Rhaenys loved each other. Visenya seemed content to spend her time on Dragonstone and focus her time on her son Maegor, who she taught how to use a sword when he turned 3. Pretty hardcore. Maegor, at age 3, the first thing that he did when he received the sword from Queen Visenya, his mother, was to butcher one of the castle's cats. We can see a hint of Maegor's personality and what it would be like already by the age of 3. This is more foreshadowing for what's to come, by the way. So growing up, Maegor had few friends, was reckless, quarrelsome, and quick to anger. At age 13, a horse kicked him in the face. He killed the horse and sliced off half of the face of the stable boy who came running towards the sound of the dying horse. The brothers, Rhaenys and Maegor, were never close, having grown up apart from each other. When it came time for the sons of Aegon to marry, another potential issue was slowly brewing underneath the surface. In the traditions of Old Valyria, and by extension the traditions of House Targaryen, it was common and recommended to marry within the family. Again, it seems gross to us, but it's a logical reason in the eyes of the Targaryens. Remember that it is the blood of Old Valyria that grants Targaryens the ability to ride dragons. So if the blood is diluted too much, they will lose that ability to ride dragons, which is their primary source of power. So it is for practical reasons why the Targaryens love incest. This, however, flew in the face of the Faith of the Seven, who considered incest to be a sin. Also, polygamy is also considered a sin, so the fact that Aegon broke both rules of the faith and still managed to keep on good terms with the faith is somewhat of a miracle already. But the question remains, what would happen after Aegon? I suppose that no one was really willing to stand up to Aegon just for the fact that he committed incest, polygamy, provided that he was a good and reasonable king and all other factors considered. But deep down inside, if you ask the people of Westeros how they really felt, the people who follow the Faith of the Seven, which is pretty much everyone except for the North and the Iron Islands, they would consider it to be blasphemous or even an abomination. So keep this in mind as we move along with the story. In 22 AC, Prince Rhaenys, the crown prince and heir to the Iron Throne, married Alyssa of House Velaryon. Recall that we talked about House Velaryon in episode 1, and they're one of the few other houses of Westeros that are descended from Old Valyria. So the Targaryens and the Velaryons are related, and Rhaenys and Alyssa were cousins. So it's not as incestuous as the marriage between Aegon and his sisters, but it's just the right amount of incest, I guess, to keep the blood of Old Valyria pure. Rhaenys and Alyssa had a daughter named Rhaena in 23 AC. Although everyone celebrated, this made the issue of succession a bit more complicated. So I mentioned earlier that the inheritance rules of Westeros was male primogeniture, where the line of succession would only pass through the oldest male line. Oh, well, this was somewhat of a lie because that hasn't been established as of yet. So it was unclear whether the line of succession would go from Rhaenys to his daughter Rhaena, who is female, or to the closest male line from Aegon, which would be Rhaenys' brother Maegor. Queen Visenya wanted her son Maegor to be the second in line to the throne, and her solution was to propose that Maegor and Rhaena be married to each other. So this would be an uncle-niece marriage, so yikes, but it would keep the blood pure and also make it clear where the line of succession is. The Faith of the Seven, though, could tolerate a cousin-to-cousin marriage. It could perhaps even under some circumstances, tolerate a sibling marriage like they did with Aegon, but an uncle-niece marriage might just be crossing the line of incest a bit too far. And the High Septon at the time, warned Aegon that such a marriage would cause problems between the crown and the faith. This idea was also opposed to by Rhaenys and Alyssa. Maybe they both knew Maegor's true nature of not being, let's just say, the nicest person. But you see how this might devolve into a bit of a conflict between Rhaenys and Visenya, who's his aunt, stepmother, I guess all of the above. Yeah, Targaryen family dynamics, am I right? So again, we'll have to see how all this plays out. But in the meantime, since Queen Visenya's idea was shot down, the High Septon proposed a marriage between Maegor and his own niece, Cerys Hightower. Now, House Hightower is the ruler of the city of Oldtown and one of the most powerful houses in all of Westeros. In the years that followed, Rhaenys and Alyssa would have another son named Aegon. Now, this is the part where it might get slightly confusing because now we have another Aegon, but I'll just refer to him as Prince Aegon for now. So to be clear, Prince Aegon is the son of Rhaenys, who's the son of Aegon the Conqueror, so Prince Aegon would be the Conqueror's grandson. Rhaenys and Alyssa would go on to have two more sons, Viserys and Jaehaerys, and one more daughter named Alysanne. Now, don't worry about the names right now so much. I know it's hard to keep track of, but the important thing to note is that Queen Visenya was now very unhappy. So recall that she wanted her son Maegor to be the ruler, or to be the heir to the throne. So the more children that Aegon and Alyssa had, the further it pushed down Maegor in the line of inheritance. This desire for Maegor to inherit the throne was shared by none other than Maegor himself, who supposedly claimed that he was the only dragon worthy of inheriting his father's throne. Targaryens like to refer to themselves as dragons sometimes. We see that the rift in the Targaryen family is starting to grow wider and wider. So now we have two competing factions. Rhaenys' faction, and Rhaenys has a lot of children now, so Maegor is getting kind of pushed aside in the line of succession. So by 35 AC, Aegon by now was 62 years old. He decided to then embark on perhaps his one last big project, which was to rebuild the original castle of Aegon Fort that he had built when he first landed in Westeros. He moved his court back to Dragonstone temporarily and commissioned trusted advisors to begin tearing down everything and remodeling the entire castle at King's Landing. He tasked Visenya with designing and building what would be called the Red Keep, and some say this was his way of sending her away from Dragonstone so that he would not have to quote-unquote endure her presence. Clearly, the relationship between the king and the queen had grown pretty cold over the years. In 37 AC, at age 64, Aegon the Conqueror died of a stroke on Dragonstone. His body was dressed in his battle armor, and he was cremated by the dragon flame of Visenya's dragon, Vhagar, as in accordance with Targaryen tradition. His Valyrian steel sword Blackfire was cremated along with his body. However, due to the unique properties of Valyrian steel, not even Dragonflame could melt it, and the sword remained relatively intact and was retrieved by Maegor after Aegon's funeral. Prince Rhaenys succeeded his father as king, and so ended the reign of King Aegon the Conqueror. This is far from the end of the story, however, since the rifts that had formed in the Targaryen family were previously held in check by Aegon. But now, after his death, we'll see the disasters that would come for the Targaryen family, and by extension the entire realm, in the not-too-distant future. Anyways, that seems like a good place to end the episode this week. Next week, we'll continue to discuss the story with the newly crowned King Rhaenys and how he intends to fill the gigantic shoes left by his father and hopefully hold the rifts within his family together. I hope you all enjoyed listening, and I'll see you all next week. Thank you.